first, we'll start with the impeachment inquiry. Joining me now, Lori Watkins, a Democratic strategist and former policy director for Barack Obama's re-election campaign, and Holly Turner, a Republican strategist and former assistant administrator for President Trump's Small Business Administration. It seems that this past week, Lori, that the Democrats had established what they would say is a foundation to say that clearly that the congressional approved money for Ukraine was being held as President Trump wanted to hear a public announcement that his potential opponent, Joe Biden, and his son was under investigation. And you had several people who said they had been given that feeling or that information from others, and one that said he actually heard a phone call where President Trump seemed more interested in whether the investigation was going to be announced rather than dealing with the security issues for the United States and for Ukraine.
That happened this week. It was pretty interesting, the testimony that we saw. I think what we saw were goons against diplomats. You've had a well-thought-out cover-up. It's not always about the crime, Rev, it's about the cover-up. And I think that's what the American public needs to see what happened, the lengths and the extent to which this president and his administration and folks within his administration initiated this cover-up of withholding this money from a country to wield their own power for their own political interest.
Now, Holly, the Republicans seem to have gone into, we want to deal with Joe Biden and other conspiracy theories, and never really addressed the real interest here is whether there was an abuse of power and whether or not this president, in fact, stalled or stopped the release of the funds that had been approved by Congress for Ukraine, who had their real danger with Russia, to try and get a political opponent at least announced to be under investigation. He didn't say corruption. He was specific, the Bidens.
Well, you know, this morning, Representative Steve Scalise from Louisiana pointed out something that's really important, and that is that money that was earmarked for Ukraine that the president did hold back temporarily, that was money that not just Nancy Pelosi but Adam Schiff voted to approve giving that money to Ukraine, but there were some strings attached, and some of those strings included making sure that corruption was investigated and stopped. They didn't want American taxpayer money being given to countries that was full of corruption, and I applaud them for that. So the president was doing what Congress asked him, and he wasn't asking for Ukraine to investigate Joe Biden. He was asking for Ukraine to investigate, to continue their investigation of Hunter Biden and his involvement with Burisma. So it really it wasn't directly related to Joe Biden. It was more about his son, and the president was doing what Nancy Pelosi asked him to do.
Well, Burisma had already been investigated, and I believe that there has been any number of reports that Hunter Biden came into it after all of that. And are you trying to say to our viewers that to ask for a son, a relative of your potential opponent, does not have some kind of effect on the potential candidate that you would oppose? And where is there a record that the president said, I want to know about corruption? He asked about a specific case. You say strings attached to the aid. There was no name Biden on those strings, Hunter or Joe. It was corruption. And there's no witness that has said it was about corruption. They said it was about the Bidens.
Well, the president was very vague, and on all accounts that we've heard.
Not according to the witnesses. Do you have a witness you can quote that says he was vague?
Well, that's a great point, Reverend. We haven't heard from a lot of witnesses.
Do you have a witness that said he was vague?
I don't, but neither do Pelosi or Schiff or any of the other Democrats.
Pelosi and them are not who I'm questioning. You made the statement he was vague. I haven't heard them say that. Do you have a witness that said he was vague?
In the transcript,
Which transcript of what witness?
The transcript that came out of the White House, pardon me, the one that the White House released that was compiled by the National Security Office, that the traditional transcript that is created after every call with a foreign leader. In that transcript, it was a little bit vague what the president was talking about with regards to investigation. Now, what's more vague is why the Democrats are bringing forth witnesses who didn't even hear the phone call. All we're hearing is people's opinions about what they think from what they've read of the transcript that we've all seen. It really doesn't make sense to me.
Lori, did not the transcript that was released by the White House was not the actual transcript of the conversation? And did we not have one witness say this week, we're told, he overheard the president on the phone call to Sondland, who's going to testify this week, who had the phone on speaker, say about the specific investigation. It didn't seem vague the way it has been reported and documented to me. Do you know of any vagueness of any of these witnesses?
No, Rev, I don't. I think the transcript that Holly is referring to is the one transcript that the administration released out of 3. So the one that she's talking about, yes, that was not directed towards his request. That was a separate transcript and a second call. He absolutely directed over the phone to Sondland through speaker, which other folks heard. He directed him to take care of this and that this was more of an issue to him than that dealing with this issue with Biden was more important than dealing with the sum of money that the country, Ukraine, was going to get.
Holly, let me ask you this. If, based on you saying it was vague, if Sondland and others come forward and say this was specifically about Biden, not corruption, not vague, would you and other Republicans then say, yes, he was doing this, abusing his power against a political opponent?
Well, that's the question. So
I raised it. I know it's the question. I need an answer.
Yeah, but that's the question that we have to get to is if the president did what the Democrats are accusing him of, is that an impeachable offense? And Republicans, and myself included, do not believe that it is. We think the president was using the tools that Congress gave him, trying to root out corruption in a country before he gave them foreign aid. He did indeed give them the foreign aid, which Obama never would give them. He gave them this foreign aid to fight against Russia, and we don't believe that that rises to an impeachable offense.
All right, let me bring in Lori to respond. I don't think Obama ever asked for an investigation on any of his opponents. Lori, you.
No, I can assure you that he did not. Something that's interesting, though, is Holly keeps going back to that witnesses will say this and this, and that there was no sign of cover-up. The cover-up is part of the crime. That is part of what we are investigating here. And you have to continue to bring those individuals forward who were part of the conversations, who keeps going back about hearsay and nobody was witness or privy to this, that, and the other. This individual that's going to testify this week, he will absolutely confirm, as he's already done before testifying in front of Congress, he can corroborate that story directly.
Well, like I said, you ain't seen nothing yet. We'll have more with Lori and Holly later in the show. As Congress prepares for another busy week in their investigation into the president, Senate Republicans are strategizing how a potential impeachment trial could play to their advantage in 2020. The Washington Post reporting, quote, some Republican senators are privately discussing whether to pressure GOP leaders to stage a lengthy impeachment trial beginning in January to scramble the Democratic presidential race. With 6 sitting Democratic senators running for president, what impact could the impeachment proceedings have on the 2020 race? Back with me, 2 political strategists, Democrat Lori Watkins and Republican Holly Turner. Lori, how can it impact the race?
So I think we just saw through last week's election in a few states that the Democrats are on top. The Democrats should be able to have another big turnaround next year in 2020. I just want to bring up a few factors that I think are really important that we saw come out of last week that we should look forward to in the future. The maturation of Latino voters, okay? Also in some of these more rural areas, we have 24% of farms that have increased in debt just over the last year. I wonder how some of these candidates are going to discuss that, not just out in Iowa and some of these other rural states, but across the board. So
all
I
right.
think that's something to look forward to.
Holly, how will these proceedings affect the election in your view, particularly the presidential and some of the 20 Senate races?
Yeah, well, it definitely will put pressure on those Democrat candidates who are in the Senate currently. You know, they'll need to be in D.C. to do their job, and that's always a tough position when you are sitting in office and also trying to run for another office. So it will definitely put pressure on them, take some of their mental resources to focus on that. But it's also going to be interesting to see how long it takes for the Senate to carry out this impeachment trial, if it gets to that, and what it does to polling in some of those battleground states. Right now, you've got 6 or 7 battleground states where polls are kind of varying wildly on this issue. Some voters, for the most part, most voters are saying they do not support impeachment of the president and removal of the president in those key states. I think the Senate Republicans are going to continue to watch that. And, you know, the Democrats started this, and so we can expect the Republicans to use whatever has been handed over to them by the Democrats to their advantage.
And we see that some polls are saying that there is a large amount, and in some of the national polls, majority, saying the president should be impeached and removed. Congressman Sean Patrick Maloney just predicted it's going to be even more direct evidence against the president this week. Do you expect that will tip the scales even more against the president and maybe the Republicans in the Senate?
I do. I think the Democrats need to continue to lay out a strong case, continue to subpoena these witnesses. We have a full week of testimony coming forward, but like the congressman said previously on the show, there is still a mountain of evidences that this administration has not turned over, and they're refusing to. I think in some of these states, you will see, as long as candidates can continue to be on message and talk about issues that are important to Americans, not solely on impeaching the president, I believe that they can continue to move that needle forward.
All right, I'm out of time. Lori Watkins and Holly Turner, thank you both for being with us.